Settle in and do not look away. This entire story is a single chilling journey that is best experienced in full. If you appreciate tales of the supernatural, show your support by subscribing. It lets us know you want more. Now, listen closely. I didn't realize a person could disappear before they were gone. Not physically, not at first. I mean something worse. Watching people look directly at you with polite confusion, like they're trying to remember where they've seen you before, only to decide they haven't. Hearing your own name spoken like a foreign word. Standing in the middle of a town you've lived in for months and understanding, with a slow, crawling horror, that the world has started making room for a version of itself without you in it. By the time I understood what was happening in Bellmere, it was already too late for several people, and one of them, I think, had tried to warn me. The only reason I remember any of this at all is because I wrote everything down. I wrote on napkins, receipts, envelopes, newspapers, walls, my own arms. I filled notebooks until my hand locked up and my wrist burned. I left notes inside my shoes, under my mattress, in the freezer, taped behind mirrors, folded into my jacket pockets. Because in Bellmere, memory was the first thing to go. And if enough people forgot you, you didn't just become lonely, you became unreal. I moved to Bellmere in late September, chasing the kind of life people describe when they've run out of better words. A fresh start. That's what I told people anyway. The truth was uglier and smaller. I was 29, recently divorced, half broke, and so exhausted by the noise of Chicago that I had started to feel like I was vibrating all the time. My friend Nolan had grown up in Bellmere and said the town was quiet, cheap, and forgettable in the best possible way. He said there was an apartment above a hardware store on Mercer Street, and the landlord barely asked questions. "Stay 6 months," he told me over the phone. "Reset your brain, then do whatever comes next." So I packed what I could fit in my car and drove east through 3 states of dead gas stations, thinning traffic, and long strips of farmland that looked bleached under the autumn sky. Bellmere wasn't on most maps. Unless you zoomed in so far, the roads looked like cracks in old paint. 1 stoplight, 1 diner, 1 church with a narrow white steeple, a grocery store that closed at 8, a row of houses with deep porches and peeling shutters, all facing each other like they were keeping watch. It was the kind of town people don't leave quickly. It was also the kind of town people don't arrive in by accident. That first week, I liked it. The silence felt medicinal. At night, I could hear the wind moving through trees instead of sirens and traffic and drunk people arguing in alleyways. The apartment was small but clean. The hardware store downstairs smelled like dust, metal, and cut wood. The owner, a square-shouldered man named Wes Harrigan, spoke slowly, like every sentence had to pass an inspection before it left his mouth. "You settling in okay?" he asked the day after I moved in. "Yeah," I said. "Still learning the place." He gave a short nod, then looked at me for a second too long. I noticed it then, though it didn't mean anything to me yet. He had that expression people get when they're trying to place a face. I smiled. "I'm Daniel. I moved into the unit upstairs." His brow relaxed a little. Right, of course. Daniel." Then he said, almost to himself, "Need to remember that." At the time, I thought he was just distracted. Bellmere had that effect on people. Conversations drifted, people paused in the middle of sentences. More than once, I saw someone standing on the sidewalk with a distant look in their eyes, as if they had stepped out of their own thoughts and forgotten how to get back in. Still, there was something comforting about the place. It felt suspended, untouched. I got coffee every morning from Alder's diner and sat in the same booth by the front window. I learned which floorboards complained in the apartment and which didn't. I started sleeping through the night for the first time in almost a year. Then, about 10 days after I arrived, I saw the flyer. It was stapled to a telephone pole outside the post office. Missing. No photo, no age, no contact number. Just a name in black capital letters. Mara Velez. Underneath, in smaller handwriting, someone had added, "If you knew her, write it down." I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, reading it again and again. It was strange, sure, but small towns did strange things their own way. Maybe the printer had run out of ink. Maybe it was some local awareness campaign. Maybe the woman didn't want her picture posted. I probably would have forgotten it if not for the old woman behind me. She was carrying a paper bag and wearing a blue raincoat, though the sky was clear. She stopped beside me and stared at the flyer. "That one again," she said. I glanced at her. "You knew her?" The woman's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes narrowed. She began. "No, maybe." She looked at the name like it offended her. "I don't know." And she turned and walked away before I could say anything else. I remember watching her cross the street with visible urgency, as if the paper itself had unsettled her. That night, I asked about the flyer at the diner. The waitress on evenings was a woman named Tara, probably in her 40s, all sharp cheekbones and tired kindness. I'd seen her every day for over a week. She knew I took my coffee black and that I always overtipped because I used to wait tables myself. When I asked, she frowned. "Mara Velez?" she repeated. "Yeah, missing flyer outside the post office." For a moment, Tara just looked at me. Then, very softly, she said, "Who's that?" I laughed a little. "That's what I'm asking." "No," she said, still frowning. "I mean, who is that?" I studied her face, waiting for the joke. It never came. "The flyer," I said. "Someone missing." She set the coffee pot down, distracted now. "I don't know any Mara Velez." "You don't know her," I said. "Fine, but you've seen the flyer, right?" A pause, then, "I don't think so." Her tone had changed. Not defensive exactly, just uneasy. I let it go, but as I ate, I noticed Tara glancing at me more than usual, like she was trying to remember whether we'd had this conversation already. When I paid, she handed me the receipt and said, "Have a good night." Another pause. "Daniel," I supplied. Her smile returned too quickly. "Right, Daniel." Need to remember that. I heard the phrase again in my head and didn't know why it bothered me. A week later, I met Ethan Vale. That's important because I think he was the first person in Bellmere who truly understood what was happening, or at least the first person willing to say it out loud. I found him at the library. Bellmere Public Library was barely larger than a 2-car garage, squeezed between the church office and an empty storefront with brown paper covering the windows. I'd gone there mostly because my apartment internet kept cutting out and I needed somewhere quiet to update my resume. There were only 3 other people inside, a teenager asleep over a textbook, a man reading a newspaper without turning pages, and Ethan. He was sitting at a corner table surrounded by open notebooks.
Not books, not magazines, notebooks. Dozens of them. Some were spiral-bound, some leather, some cheap school composition books with bent corners and frayed spines. He wasn't reading them so much as cross-checking them, flipping from one to another with the tension of someone defusing a bomb. I only looked his way because he suddenly stood up and said, loudly enough to startle all three of us, "No, that's not right." The librarian snapped, "Ethan." He ignored her and looked around the room in a kind of controlled panic. His eyes landed on me, narrowed, and stayed there. Then he walked straight over. "You're new," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I said, "about 3 weeks." His shoulders tightened. "Then you need to start writing things down." I actually smiled at that. "Okay." "I'm serious." There was no humor in his face. He looked maybe 35, but stress had done strange things to him. Deep shadows under the eyes, shirt half-tucked, fingers stained with pen ink. He kept glancing toward the windows, though nothing was moving outside except leaves. "What things?" I asked. "Everything." I laughed once, awkwardly. "That sounds manageable." He leaned in. "Names," he said. "Faces, conversations. Who you saw, when you saw them, what they were wearing, who they were with. Every day, every detail, even if it feels stupid." I felt the first real chill then. "What are you talking about?" Ethan looked over his shoulder at the librarian. She was pretending not to watch us and doing a terrible job. He lowered his voice. "People disappear here." That, by itself, didn't sound supernatural, just sad. I said, "Disappear how?" He studied my face carefully, as if deciding whether I was capable of hearing the answer. "First," he said, "small things go wrong. Someone forgets your order, your neighbor asks your name twice in 1 week, co-workers stop including you in stories you were actually there for." I thought of Tara, Wes, the old woman in the raincoat. Ethan saw it land. "Then," he continued, "people start forgetting bigger things, conversations, favors, shared memories, entire years sometimes. They know something is wrong, but they can't hold on to it. It slides off. And then?" His lips parted. Then he said, "Then they stop remembering you at all." The library suddenly felt airless. I glanced at the notebooks on his table. "Is that what all this is?" He nodded. "Backups." "Backups for what?" "For reality." I should have walked away.
I know that's what sensible people would say. I was new in town, lonely, susceptible to local folklore and small-town eccentricity. Ethan could have been unstable, probably should have seemed unstable, but the problem was that he didn't sound insane. He sounded like a man explaining the weather to someone who hadn't looked outside yet. "Has this happened to someone you know?" I asked. His expression changed. Something closed behind his eyes. "Yes," he said. "Who?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His face tightened in visible effort, as if he were trying to drag a word through thick mud. Finally, he pressed his palms against the table and whispered, "I wrote her down. I know I wrote her down." Her. Whoever she was, the loss of her was still alive inside him, but the shape of it had been eaten away. I didn't know what to say. Ethan looked at me sharply. "Have you seen flyers?" That startled me. "One, for a woman named Mara Velez." He went pale. "You remember the name?" "Yeah." "How long ago?" "Maybe a week and a half." He stepped closer. "Write it down now." What? Write it down. His urgency snapped something in me. I reached into my jacket, pulled out an old receipt and a pen, and wrote, Mara Velez, missing flyer outside post office. Ethan exhaled like a man whose lungs had been locked. Good, he muttered. Good. Then he took the receipt from my hand, turned it over, and wrote 3 more words. Don't trust tomorrow. I stared at the message. Before I could ask what it meant, the library lights flickered. Just once. A faint hiccup in the electricity. When they steadied again, Ethan was looking around the room with flat terror. The teenager was still asleep. The newspaper man still hadn't turned the page. The librarian was staring directly at Ethan now. But her expression was wrong. Not angry. Not confused. Blank. The kind of blankness you see a second before someone asks who you are. Ethan noticed it too. He grabbed his notebooks with sudden, frantic speed, shoving them into a canvas bag. One fell open on the floor near my chair. I looked down. Every page was filled, edge to edge, with names. Hundreds of them. Some had dates, some had question marks. Some were crossed out so hard the paper had torn. And at the bottom of one page, written over and over in darker ink until the letters bled through, was a single sentence. If everyone forgets you, leave before the town does. I looked up. Ethan had already backed away from the table. The librarian said, Sir? Not Ethan, me. Her eyes were on me now, polite and uncertain. Can I help you? The question should have been normal. Instead, it hit me like ice water. I had been there for almost an hour. I had checked out a desk lamp extension from her 20 minutes earlier. She'd already spoken to me twice. But now she was looking at me the way you look at a stranger who wandered in off the street. Ethan saw my face and knew exactly what had happened. Start tonight, he said. Then he left the library carrying his bag of notebooks, moving so fast he nearly ran into the door. I stayed frozen for another few seconds while the librarian waited. Finally I said, No, sorry, I'm fine. She gave me a small, apologetic smile. All right, let me know if you need anything. As if we had never met. As if this were the first word she'd spoken to me all day. I looked down at the receipt in my hand. Mara Velez. Don't trust tomorrow. When I got back to my apartment, there was a yellow sticky note on my front door in handwriting I didn't recognize. It said, You live here. Your name is Daniel Mercer. Do not go to sleep without writing today down. I stood there in the hall for a long time, key in hand, staring at those words. And for one awful second, one tiny, impossible second, I couldn't remember if the handwriting was mine. I wish I could say I was still skeptical after that. I wasn't. Not really. Skepticism depends on the comfort of distance. It needs room to stand somewhere safe and fold its arms. But the moment I saw that note on my door, something shifted. I didn't know if Ethan had left it there, or if I had written it to myself and forgotten, or if some third person in Bellmere had decided I was far enough gone to need instructions. What mattered was this: the note felt necessary. I unlocked the apartment and went straight inside, then locked it again behind me with a care I hadn't used since moving there. The place looked the same as always: narrow kitchenette, second-hand couch, lamp in the corner, one window facing Mercer Street, but there was a strange thinness to it, like the apartment had become a copy of itself. Everything was where I expected. Everything was familiar. And yet I stood in the center of the room for almost a minute, waiting for certainty to arrive. It didn't. So I did what Ethan told me. I started writing. At first, it felt ridiculous. I found an old spiral notebook in the kitchen junk drawer, one of those half-used ones people keep for passwords and grocery lists, and wrote the dates across the top of the first clean page. October 17th. Then below it, my name is Daniel Mercer. I live in the apartment above Harrigan Hardware on Mercer Street in Bellmere. I moved here from Chicago on September 24th. I paused, thinking, then kept going. Things I know are true. I drink black coffee. I was married once, but not anymore. Nolan told me about this place. There was a flyer for a missing woman named Mara Velez. Ethan Vale told me people in Bellmere disappear when they are forgotten. The librarian forgot me. There was a note on my door that may or may not be mine. Once I started, I couldn't stop. I wrote down every conversation I could remember from the past week. Wes at the hardware store, Tara at the diner, the woman in the blue raincoat, Ethan in the library, the notebooks, the sentence, "If everyone forgets you, leave before the town does." By midnight, my wrist ached. By 1 a.m, I had filled 14 pages. At some point, I got up, tore strips from a paper grocery bag, and started leaving myself smaller reminders around the apartment. Check the notebook first. I taped that one to the bathroom mirror. You live alone. No one else should be here. That went above the kitchen sink. If something feels off, it probably is. Write it down. That one I stuck beside the front door. The last note I made before sleeping was the simplest. If you wake up confused, do not panic. Read. I placed the notebook on the pillow beside my head, like a second skull, and lay there staring at the ceiling until the dark softened into grey. When I finally slept, I dreamed of standing in the middle of Mercer Street while everyone in town passed by me without slowing down. I shouted until my throat tore. I waved my arms. I ran in front of cars. No one looked at me. Then the buildings began to change. Not disappear, not exactly, just lose detail. The pharmacy sign went blank first. Then the church lost its stained glass windows. Then the hardware store beneath my apartment became an empty rectangle of brick with no door at all. I woke up gasping and grabbed for the notebook before my eyes were even fully open. It was there. For one fragile second, relief flooded me. Then I saw that the note on the bathroom mirror was gone. I got out of bed so fast I nearly fell. The tape was still there, a clean square of it stuck to the glass, but the paper was missing. I checked the floor, the sink, the trash can. Nothing. I went to the kitchen. The note above the sink was still there. So was the one by the front door. Only the mirror note had vanished. I stood in the apartment with cold feet on the wooden floorboards, staring at that blank patch of tape and trying not to think in directions that had no good ending. Maybe it had fallen in the night. Maybe there had been moisture on the glass. Maybe I had imagined putting it there at all. Then I opened my notebook and found a sentence at the bottom of the last page. Not in my handwriting from the night before, but fresher, harder pressed, slightly slanted. The bathroom is where they start. I don't remember writing it. That was the first morning I seriously considered leaving Bellmere. I even began packing. I put clothes back into the duffel bag I'd never fully unpacked, wrapped my laptop in a towel, gathered chargers and toiletries, and the envelope of documents from my glove compartment. The plan was simple. Drive out, stop at the first gas station in the next county, call Nolan, and laugh about how I'd spent 3 weird weeks in the most unsettling town in America. That was the plan. Then I went downstairs to return my spare key to Wes. The hardware store was open. Bell above the door, smell of sawdust, shelves stacked with tools and feed buckets and coils of rope. Same as always. Wes was behind the counter, reading a catalogue. He looked up when I entered and smiled politely. "Can I help you?" It took me a second to answer. His voice was friendly, neutral. The voice you use with a customer you've never seen before. I held up the spare key. "You gave me this when I moved in." He frowned a little, not suspicious yet, just uncertain. "Did I?" "For the apartment upstairs." A pause. He looked toward the ceiling, as if trying to picture rooms he had never personally visited. "There's no apartment upstairs," he said. I laughed, actually laughed. It came out wrong, too loud, too fast. Very funny. Wes didn't smile. I slowly lowered the key and studied his face. Nothing in it. Not recognition hidden under a joke. Not concern. Not embarrassment. Just blank courtesy and a mild desire for the conversation to clarify itself. "You rented it to me," I said. "I'm sorry," he replied. "I think you might be mistaken. Storage is upstairs." I looked toward the stairwell at the back of the store. Same door, same narrow staircase, same place I had walked up and down every day for 3 weeks. "You're telling me I don't live there?" Wes followed my gaze. "Sir, no one lives there." The store had gone very quiet. I could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. I felt suddenly vividly aware of the notebook tucked under my arm. "What's my name?" I asked him. He blinked. "I don't know." Yesterday he'd known it, the day before too. Maybe he'd had trouble holding on to it. Maybe I had already started slipping, but now there was nothing. I backed away from the counter, Wes straightened a little. "Are you all right?" I didn't answer. I turned, pushed through the door, and stood out on Mercer Street, breathing hard through my nose, the morning cold and bright and far too normal for what had just happened. That was when I noticed the flyer on the telephone pole was gone. Not torn, not weathered away, gone. The staple was still there, the paper wasn't. I crossed the street anyway, like there was some chance I'd see another copy nearby. There wasn't. I checked the post office window, the laundromat board, the diner entrance. Nothing. No Mara Velez. No missing flyer. No trace. Inside Alder's diner, Tara was wiping down the counter. The radio behind her played old country, low enough to sound tired. When she saw me, she smiled the smile of a waitress greeting a new customer. "Sit anywhere you like." That almost broke me more than Wes had, because Tara had known me. She had known my coffee order, my face, the fact that I overtipped. We had exchanged enough ordinary words to anchor a person in a place. Not intimacy, but recognition. The daily stitching that makes you real to other people. I sat in my usual booth anyway. Tara came over with a menu. A menu. "I'm good," I said. "Black coffee." She nodded and walked away. No flicker, no memory struggle, no moment of almost recognition. I opened the notebook under the table and wrote, "Morning of October 18th. Wes says there is no apartment upstairs. Tara does not know me. Flyer for Mara Velez is gone. Things are accelerating." Tara brought the coffee and set it down. "Anything else? Have you ever heard the name Mara Velez?" She hesitated, not because she recognized it, because it made her uncomfortable. "I don't think so," she said. "Think harder." Her posture changed immediately, a small withdrawal, a defensive stillness. "Sir, if you need something." She was on a missing flyer outside the post office. "I don't know what you mean." "Someone in this town is disappearing." A couple at the counter glanced over. Tara lowered her voice. "You need to calm down." I stared at her, then nodded once and looked away. She retreated with the measured caution people use around someone they've decided might be unstable. That's when I realized the notebook had to be more than a record. It had to become proof. Because if Bellmere erased social memory first, it would eventually erase context around me too. If enough people forgot my place in the town, then every attempt to explain myself would sound deranged. I paid for the coffee with shaking hands and left before Tara could ask me not to come back. Outside, the day had sharpened into one of those cold October mornings that makes every sound distinct. Car doors, bird calls, wind brushing dead leaves across the curb. I stood under the diner awning and forced myself to think in sequence. Find Ethan. He knew more than anyone. He had warned me. And if Bellmere hadn't taken him yet, he was my best chance of understanding what to do next. The library was only 3 blocks away. I walked fast, notebook under my arm like a shield. Twice I had the unpleasant sensation that I had forgotten something essential, but each time I stopped, checked my written list, and kept moving. When I reached the library, the front door was locked. A paper sign hung behind the glass. Closed for invent. No date. No explanation. I pressed my face near the window. Inside, the lights were off. The small front room looked untouched except for one thing. The corner table where Ethan had been sitting was empty. Not just cleared. clean. No notebooks, no pen marks, no sign anyone had occupied that space for hours the day before. I circled the building and found the side alley damp with shade and leaves. There was a dumpster against the back wall, lid half open. Beside it sat 3 black trash bags and a cardboard box gone soft from old rain. I don't know what made me look. Maybe desperation, maybe instinct, maybe the same morbid force that makes people slow down near accidents. The box was full of books with damaged covers, old tax forms, and a cracked plastic file tray. On top of it all was a single spiral notebook with the front cover torn off. I grabbed it immediately. Inside, every page was blank except one. Near the middle, in cramped ink that I recognized as Ethan's, someone had written, "If you find this and you still remember me, my name is Ethan Vale. I live at 14 Willow Lane. Come before sunset. If I don't know you, use the names." Below that were 7 names in a vertical list. Lena Grace Martin, June Peter, Mara Daniel. I froze on the last one. My own name looked wrong there. Not because it was misspelled, but because it was included, like an item already filed away. I turned the page over. Nothing. I checked the rest of the notebook. Blank. No context. No instructions. Just the address, the names, and that line. If I don't know you, use the names. Willow Lane was on the edge of town, past the church and the old elementary school with the boarded up annex. I walked there without fully deciding to. It seemed better than going back to an apartment the landlord denied existed. The town thinned as I moved east. Houses spread farther apart. Trees leaned closer to the road. Mailboxes stood at angles like tired guards. Halfway there, I passed a man raking leaves. He straightened when he saw me and gave a slow nod. I almost kept walking. Then he said, "You should carry a photograph." I stopped. What? The man planted the rake and looked at me with an expression too calm to be friendly. "A photograph," he repeated, "of yourself. It helps sometimes." Helps with what? He seemed to consider the question honestly. "With the middle part," he said. What middle part? But he had already bent to the leaves again. Conversation over. I stood there a moment longer, wanting to push, afraid to push, then moved on. By the time I reached Willow Lane, clouds had begun gathering over the town in a pale grey lid. Number 14 was a narrow house with faded green siding and a porch that sagged toward one corner. The yard was crowded with dead flower stalks and stacked crates. Every curtain was drawn. I climbed the steps and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. Then, just as I was deciding whether to try the side of the house, I heard movement inside. 3 slow footsteps. A pause. Then the sound of a lock turning. The door opened 2 inches. Ethan looked out through the gap. At first, I felt relief so strong it was almost dizziness. Then I saw his face. He didn't know me. Not in the partial way Tara hadn't known me. Not in the strained way Wes had lost the thread. This was absolute. His eyes moved over me with the cold, careful attention you'd give someone standing on your porch after dark. Yes? It's me, I said, then immediately hated how weak that sounded. Daniel, from the library. Nothing. I found your notebook. Still nothing. Ethan's hand tightened on the inside edge of the door. I think you have the wrong house. Before he could shut it, I pulled out the spiral notebook and opened to the page. Lena, I said. Grace. Martin. June. Peter. Mara. At the sixth name, something flickered behind his eyes. Not memory exactly. Pain. His mouth parted slightly. Then I said the last one. Daniel. The change in him was immediate. Not full recognition. More like the first crack in frozen glass. He opened the door another inch and stared at me with sudden, naked fear. Get inside, he whispered. I stepped in. He shut the door hard behind me, locked it, then locked it again with a second deadbolt, and slid a chain across for good measure. The entryway smelled like dust, stale coffee, and wet paper. Every wall I could see was covered in notes. Not decorations. Notes. Hundreds of them. Pinned index cards, taped receipts, marker on butcher paper. Names and arrows and dates and warnings layered so densely the wallpaper beneath had vanished. You have been here before. She was real. Check the basement steps if the radio says your name. Turn it off. Don't let them clean the church. Ethan turned to me, breathing too quickly. How much do you remember? The fact that he asked it instead of, who are you, almost made me collapse. Enough, I said. Not enough. People are forgetting me. He gave a sharp, humorless exhale. Then you're later than I hoped. Later than you hoped? He motioned me farther inside. Come on. The living room was worse, or better, depending on how you looked at it. Every surface was occupied by evidence of war against forgetting. Corkboards, stacks of labelled notebooks, Polaroids clipped to string lines stretched wall to wall, names written on tape and stuck to furniture. The coffee table held 6 watches, all set to different times, and a row of cassette recorders with dates written on masking tape. I turned slowly, trying to take it in. You live like this? I live at all because of this. He handed me a glass of water from the kitchen sink. I didn't realize how thirsty I was until half of it was gone. You really forgot me? I asked. His face tightened with shame and frustration. Until you said the names, yes. What are they? Anchors. For you. For anyone, he said. Sometimes names stay after everything else goes, not because they're stronger, just because they connect to older damage. I stared at him. Older damage? Ethan looked toward the covered windows, then back at me. You still think this started with the missing flyers? I think it started before I got here. It started before either of us got here. He sat down at the table beneath a lamp crowded with notebooks and motioned for me to do the same. For a moment, he just rubbed his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was flatter, as if the telling had been repeated too many times. Bellmere used to have a cemetery on the South Hill, he said. Original town cemetery. Late 1800s mostly. Small place. Families, mill workers, a few unmarked children's graves from the influenza years. Nothing dramatic, nothing famous. Then in the 70s, they expanded the county road. I waited. They moved the graves, he said. Okay. They say they moved them. Something in the room seemed to lean closer. I glanced at the notes on the walls. Some were too far to read clearly, but I could make out repeating words. Records, soil, empty, markers, north, ledger, missing. Ethan saw where I was looking. The town did what towns always do, he said. Made practical decisions, cut costs, buried paperwork, told itself a cleaner story. Some graves were relocated, some markers were stored, some remains. He trailed off. No one agrees on the number, or maybe they used to. Doesn't matter now. I felt cold all over again. You think that caused this? I think Bellmere became a place that learned how to lose people without admitting it. That sounds metaphorical. It isn't. He reached behind him and pulled a ledger from one of the shelves. Old, cloth-bound, corners softened with age. He opened it carefully and turned it toward me. Inside were handwritten entries in fading ink. Dates, family names, plot numbers. Then gaps. Whole stretches of missing pages. Not torn cleanly. Removed in chunks. At first, Ethan said, it was local. A few stories every decade. Someone insisting they had a brother no one else remembered. A teacher convinced a student had vanished from class lists. People called it grief, alcohol, stress. Bellmere is good at explaining itself until it doesn't have to. I traced one finger just above the old paper without touching it. And now? Now it's faster. Why? I don't know. That answer at least sounded honest. Maybe because the town's shrinking. Maybe because fewer new memories are being made to cover the old damage. Maybe because someone disturbed something that was left buried. Or maybe Bellmere has simply gotten hungry. I looked up. Hungry? He met my gaze without blinking. You'll notice, he said quietly, that this only ever happens to people. Not buildings, not roads, not records at first. People. The town sheds them like weight. I thought of my dream, the blank storefronts, the vanishing details. Records at first, I repeated. Ethan gave a grim nod. That's the final stage. I didn't like the sound of that. What's the order? He stood and crossed to one wall where a large sheet of paper had been pinned. A hand-drawn timeline covered it in red and black marker. At the top, in block letters, erasure progression. He pointed to the first section. Misplacement. People forget minor details. Names, routines, faces they should know. Then lower. Disconnection. Social memory breaks. Relationships blur. Places feel less yours. Lower still. Contradiction. Others deny shared facts. Your apartment doesn't exist. Your job didn't happen. People insist you are mistaken. I swallowed. Then he touched the last section. Removal. There wasn't much written under it, just 3 lines. Photos fail. Records shift. Witnesses collapse. I stared at the words. What happens to the person? Ethan was quiet for so long I almost thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he said, "That depends on whether anyone is still able to remember them." The room seemed suddenly too small. "Ethan." He looked at me. "Tell me straight." He did. "If everyone forgets you at once," he said, "you usually go missing." Usually. The word lodged in me like a splinter. What does usually mean? He looked away, and in that silence, I knew there were worse possibilities than simply disappearing. A floorboard cracked somewhere deeper in the house. Both of us froze. Not because old houses don't make noise, because Ethan had gone still in the exact way prey goes still. He lifted one finger for silence. Another creak. This one from below us. The basement. My heart began to pound. Ethan rose very slowly and crossed to a cabinet near the kitchen archway. From inside he took a flashlight, a cassette recorder, and a revolver so old it looked inherited. I stared at the gun. He said this was psychological. I said it starts that way. He clicked off the lamp above the table. The room dimmed to grey under the weak window light. Another sound drifted up from below. 3 soft knocks. Not random settling, not pipes. Knocks. Slow and deliberate. Something in the basement had just asked to be noticed. Ethan looked at me without expression and whispered, "Do not answer if it uses your voice." 3 more knocks came from the basement door. Soft, measured, patient. Not the sound of someone trapped and desperate. Not pounding, not scratching, not frantic movement. Just a calm little rhythm, like a guest at the wrong entrance. I became aware of everything at once. The stale air in the room, the dry taste in my mouth, the notebook pressing against my ribs inside my jacket, the old wood under my shoes, Ethan's breathing, my own pulse in my throat. Then the knocks stopped. Ethan didn't move. Neither did I. The house seemed to hold itself still around us. After maybe 10 seconds, though it felt much longer, a voice floated up from below. "Ethan?" My skin turned cold instantly. The voice was male, quiet, familiar in an intimate, domestic way I couldn't place. Ethan's face drained of what little colour it had. Again the voice said, "Ethan, it's me." There are moments when fear announces itself not with panic, but with certainty. I knew, in the same sick way I know the feeling of stairs in the dark, that whatever was in the basement was not someone who should have been there. Ethan raised the flashlight slightly and mouthed the words, "Don't speak." The basement voice waited. Then it tried again, gentler this time. "You left the light on." The floorboard creaked under my foot before I could stop it. The voice below went silent. For one terrible second, I thought that was worse. Then it spoke again. "Daniel?" I nearly made a sound. It wasn't just that it knew my name. It used it carefully, with the exact uncertain tone someone might use if they were trying not to scare me. "Daniel," it said, "you shouldn't trust him." My body reacted before my mind did. I turned to Ethan. He shut his eyes once, as if in exhausted agreement with a pattern he'd seen too many times. Then he leaned closer and whispered so quietly I felt the words more than heard them. "It reads pressure." "What?" "It says what hurts." The voice below changed approach immediately, almost as if it had heard us. "I know about the flyer," it said. "I know about Mara." Ethan's hand closed around my wrist, hard enough to hurt. "Do not answer," he breathed. The voice continued, still calm. "He didn't tell you everything." A third voice would have been impossible. A fourth, absurd. But what frightened me most was how human the basement voice remained. No growl, no distortion, no theatrical menace. Just a person speaking in a low tone from the other side of a door. The kind of ordinary sound that makes your instincts argue with your fear. I think that's why it was effective, because a part of me wanted to believe there had to be an explanation. Maybe Ethan wasn't alone in the house. Maybe someone was hiding downstairs. Maybe Bellmere was full of terrified people, and one of them had learned my name somehow. Then the voice spoke again. This time it sounded exactly like Nolan. "Daniel, open the door." Every hair on my arms lifted. Not similar, not close. Exactly. My friend Nolan's voice. The same mild Midwestern roughness. The same slightly amused cadence he'd always had, and telling me to stop overthinking things. For a split second, I was back in Chicago, standing on the sidewalk outside his apartment with winter in the air and traffic hissing on wet streets. That one sentence did more damage than all the others, because it didn't merely frighten me, it reached into my memory and moved furniture. I took a step toward the basement door. Ethan yanked me back so hard I stumbled into the wall. "Listen to me," he whispered, fierce now. "It can only come up if you let it organize you." I heard Nolan. "No, you heard access," That made no sense. But before I could ask what he meant, the voice below became my own. "Ethan," it called softly, in my voice. "Let me out." I stopped breathing. It wasn't an imitation the way people imitate voices. It was placement. My own voice, exactly where it belongs in the air. The result was worse than hearing a monster. It was hearing myself from somewhere I had never been. Thank you for staying until the very end of this story. The darkness still hides many secrets, and more mysterious tales are yet to come. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you won't get lost in the shadows and will be the first to hear them.